Tanmanjit Singh Desi to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms McVeigh, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I'm delighted to be able to bring this debate once again to Parliament and to be able to combine it with a petition signed by over 15,000 members of the public thus far, who I know, like me, feel passionately about this issue. Madam Chair, I apologise if you're getting déjà vu, because just over a year ago, I stood in this same room and spoke on this very matter. My honourable friend, the member for Jarrow, brought this important debate to the House, and members, on a cross-party basis, spoke very eloquently for the rights of their constituents in the face of this repugnant practice. Sadly, the fact that we are here again today is indicative of how little progress has been made by the government. Hiding behind reports and consultations, there has been little concrete action. You would be forgiven in thinking they've been somewhat distracted over recent weeks, embroiled in another employment debate, a little closer to home. Operation Save Big Dog, trying desperately to save the job of a blundering, misleading and morally bankrupt Prime Minister. It's the same old story from government, repeated promises with no action. This is despite the fact that we are approaching the 5th anniversary of the Taylor Review. And Ms McVeigh, you may recall that in January 2022, I secured and led on a parliamentary debate into the Taylor Review and modern working practices. Many of us pressed the government to keep its promises, initiate reform, but absolutely no joy whatsoever. We've seen fire and rehire practices condemned by countless government ministers, and the employment bill has been promised a staggering 20 times over the last 3 years. This bill, being published, has a lot in common with the Prime Minister resigning. Both are events that should have happened months ago, clearly supported by a majority of the public and MPs, only to be needlessly delayed by Tory incompetence. Yet, as they stall, unscrupulous employers act. 10% of workers, Ms McVeigh, no less, have faced a fire and rehire within their job. Almost a quarter of employees say their working terms have been downgraded since the first lockdown, and 800 loyal P&O Ferries workers have been scandalously sacked. And all government can say is that their planned statutory code will be announced in, and I quote, due course. Given how often they say that, I'm beginning to think that in due course might be their next manifesto pledge and their next manifesto slogan. Get it done in due course. And I do give way to my honourable friend from Strangford.
For slightly given way. It wasn't just the issue of the workers being laid off. It was those who they picked up who did not adhere to or were able and acknowledgeable and understood the health and safety issues on the P&O ferries. That was part of the problem as well, because they took the good people away that knew what to do and reinforced them with people who didn't have the ability, with great respect.
I think my honourable friend from Strangford makes an excellent point, and that is why it is important that we have skilled individuals who are working, who need to be regarded for their loyalty to that job and for their competence as well. But call me cynical, Ms McVeigh, but it seems certain policies can be expedited over others. The Home Office colleagues seem to have no difficulty in implementing the inhumane Rwanda policy swiftly, or pushing to break international law, or selling off the popular and successful Channel 4. I do.
Thank you for giving way. Does it not think part of the problem with the government at the moment is if they do try to expedite fire rehire, whilst they're trying to fire the current Prime Minister, that they unfortunately will have to rehire him on worse terms and we're all going to suffer?
Well, I tell you what, my honourable friend from Bury makes an excellent point, although with a great deal of wit. But, Mr McVeigh, yet it seems that while the government can do all this, that supporting workers' rights has been abandoned at the bottom of the pile. Not a priority for this government, whose own job security seems to be valued above that of an average working person. What does the Prime Minister expect from our great British workforce? Under this government, are workers meant to put up and shut up about their inadequate pay, conditions and benefits without adequate legal protections? Thankfully, due to the excellent work of unions like Unite, Unison, GMB, TSSA, RMT, ASLEF and others, there's some support and respite for employees from fire and rehire. But without legislation, this issue will, I fear, continue to persist. It's clear what is actually needed: to outlaw fire and rehire, not to have some sort of consultation, but to outlaw it and bring forward an urgent bill to strengthen workers' rights. Lip service won't stop fire and rehire. An effective ban will. Government plans on statutory code fall woefully short, and even then, they're struggling to implement to the bare minimum. Current government proposals would mean fire and rehire would remain legal, consultation procedures would not be improved, and workers would continue to be dismissed for not agreeing to an inferior contract. Quite simply, all this will achieve is increase a company's financial calculation before using fire and rehire tactics regardless. When we know this doesn't work already, P&O ferries calculated that it was financially worth foregoing consultations, despite knowing that they were necessary, before cutting almost 800 jobs and replacing them with agency workers, with their chief executive saying, and I quote, "I would make this decision again, I'm afraid." Unscrupulous employers acting without consequence, companies have looked at our current legislation, deemed it not fit for purpose and exploited it. Failing to turn this tide now is a green light for other employers to behave in exactly the same way. P&O ferries did not act in a vacuum. This came after persistent, immoral fire and rehire tactics being used throughout the pandemic. British Airways and other such companies, called a national disgrace by the Transport Select Committee for their actions, which put thousands of jobs at risk and flooded my inbox with concerned Slough constituents working at Heathrow Airport. Employees who had worked for the company for decades threatened to be cast off in the beginnings of a global pandemic. Unforgivable. It was only due to the excellent work of unions for the workers involved that jobs were saved and deals were reached. But it shouldn't come to this. British Gas, owned by Centrica, threatened the livelihoods of 5,000 employees, using the threat of coronavirus as a smokescreen to act unethically against many of my Slough constituents, and I know constituents affecting many other honourable and right honourable members. It took 44 days of strike action and 500 workers dismissed before an agreement was reached, bringing the dispute to an end. Again, without unions, thousands more workers would have been left without a job and without representation. Quite frankly, the Prime Minister has job security. Actually, I will, yeah.
Gentleman for giving way. He and I walked here together to this debate from the Chamber, where there was severe trade union bashing going on from the government side. Isn't that the reality from the current government? Is they're too busy bashing trade unions and not working with them?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and that's exactly what we were discussing as we made our way from the main chamber into the Westminster Hall, that the government is trying to pick a fight with unions rather than actually dealing with issues, rather than coming to the negotiating table. For example, the hugely disruptive rail strikes, which will have a huge impact on many of us. That issue could have been resolved by now had rail ministers actually done the job that they were supposed to do. And Ms McQuaid, quite frankly, the Prime Minister has job security these employees could only dream of. Put simply, fire and rehire is not a negotiating tactic, but a direct threat to workers. It has no place in our modern Great Britain, and government should be ashamed that it has been allowed to proliferate under their watch. I hope the Minister today has some good news for the thousands who have been affected by this abhorrent tactic and the millions more who could be at risk of it. And I also would like to say, Ms McVeigh, that it is very, very disappointing that not one single Conservative colleague has come along to speak on behalf of their constituents, apart from the Minister today, because that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be acting in solidarity on a cross-party basis to battle against this fire and rehire tactic and to press government ministers to finally introduce legislation. We, Ms McVeigh, should have working standards that we are proud of and celebrate our country's fantastic workforce, yet government seems intent on a race to the bottom when it comes to workers' rights. Warm words won't do it anymore. Clear-cut legislation will. Thank you very much, Ms. McVeigh.